Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 37, Euthyphro 4c to E. Euthyphro is prosecuting his father because of miasma, pollution, but now he goes into some detail about the actual case. That there is miasma is because his father killed whoever he killed unjustly, because if he had killed him justly, Euthyphro wouldn't have prosecuted him. Given that Euthyphro is so certain that his father killed someone unjustly, we may expect the account to be very straightforward. So here it is. Epei hoge apothenon pelates tis en emos, kai hos egeorgumen ente naxo, ethetuen eke par heimin. Since the one who died, remember that died means killed as well, the one who was killed was a labourer of mine, and as we were farming in Naxos, he was working there at our place. Naxos is quite a big island between Athens and Asia Minor, Turkey today, and the Athenians had colonized the island, that is, sent a colony to keep the locals in order after they'd rebelled against the Athenians sometime in the 5th century, which means that Euthyphro and his father were Athenian citizens but were working in Naxos. The labourer is actually a pelates, which is something like a client, so he is bound in some way to Euthyphro, and where Euthyphro goes, that's where he goes as well, which is why he's ended up working in Naxos as well. Paroinesas un kai orgistes ton oiketon tini ton hemeteron aposphate auton. Well then, having got drunk and angry at one of the slaves, one of ours, he slits his throat. Wait for it, this isn't the murder that Euthyphro is prosecuting his father for. One of the clients of Euthyphro has killed one of the slaves of Euthyphro and his father. Notice that this story is now being told in the present tense. When Euthyphro began, he said that we were farming in Naxos, but now the client slits the throat of the slave. The whole story from now on is in the present tense. This makes the whole account more vivid, which may make it more engaging to the audience, or because Euthyphro himself is reliving the events. I mean Euthyphro, the character in this dialogue, not the historical Euthyphro. Ho un pater sondesas tus podas kai tas heras autu katabalones tafrontina pempe diuro andra pius somenon tu exegetu hoti chreye poien. Well then, my father, having bound the feet and the hands of him, that is the murderer, having thrown him into some ditch, sends to here, that is to Athens, a man to ask of the exegetes what he should do. An exegetes was an Athenian official who decided on appropriate action in religious cases. We can call the exegetes an interpreter. An Athenian slave was the property of his master. The master could sell the slave, send him anywhere he wanted, tell him to do whatever he wanted, but he couldn't actually kill him. If anybody else harmed the slave, the master could demand damages, compensation. But in this case, the murderer was a client of his own son. Since father and son were working in the same place, the father could have demanded some compensation from his son if he had wanted to. The fact that he sends to Athens to find out what to do about the murder suggests that this wasn't the main problem. It seems that the main problem is that the slave was murdered, and this was now a religious offense. We should note that Euthyphro's father bound the murderer by his hands and feet and threw him into a ditch. These are all signs that the father was concerned about miasma, pollution. This suggests that Euthyphro would have done exactly the same thing had he been in his father's position. And yet Euthyphro is prosecuting his father for murder. Why? Ende tuto to chrono tu dedemenu oligore te kai emele hos androphonu kai uden on pragma e kai apothanoi hoperun kai epathen. During this time, in other words, the time it took for the man who was sent to Athens to the interpreter to come back with the interpreter's response, he, that is the father, paid no heed and neglected the bound man as a man-killer, and as being no problem if he even died, which indeed is what happened. Hupogar limu kai rigus kai ton desmon apothneske printon angelon paratu exegetu afficestai. For by hunger and cold and the bonds he dies before the messenger arrives from the interpreter. Euthyphro charges his father with neglect, but in fact his father appears to have followed the due process of isolating the murderer who is polluted. You do not eat with someone polluted because then you become polluted yourself. This is something Euthyphro himself has said. The main reason for the murderer's death here seems to be that Naxos is so far away from Athens. The whole system of sending to the interpreter to find out what to do would have worked while Athens was a small polis. But now there are Athenian citizens working on Naxos, which is 2 days sailing away from Athens, which means that it takes at least 4 days for a reply to return to someone who wants to know what to do with a murderer, who in the meantime, because of the problems of miasma, has isolated the murderer and cannot give him food or shelter. We may imagine that the family of Euthyphro may be slightly upset with Euthyphro for prosecuting his father for murder, when it's fairly clear that Euthyphro's father behaved by the book. In fact, we now learn that they are upset, as Euthyphro himself explains. Taute deun kai aganacte hote pater kai hoi alloi oikeioi, hoti ego hupertu androphonu to patri phonu epexerchomai ute apoctenanti hos fascine kenoi. Both my father and the rest of the family are irritated because I am prosecuting my father on behalf of this man-murderer for murder, and he didn't even kill him, so they say. They're technically correct, because the father just put the murderer in a ditch and left him there while he was waiting for the interpreter's message to come back from Athens. But even if we accept that this is what caused the murderer to die, the family have this covered as well. Ut ehoti malista pectenen, androphonu geontos tu apothnontos, uden frontidzen hupertu toiutu, anosion garenai tohuon patriphonon epexienai. Kakos edotes, O Socrates, to theon hos echetu hos tiu te peri kai tu anosiu. And even if he did kill him, There's no need to be concerned about such a person, someone who murdered a man, if he dies, for it is unholy, anosion, for a son to prosecute his father for murder. They say this, Socrates, badly knowing the divine, how it stands regarding hosion and anosion, the holy and the unholy. Euthyphro's relatives are saying that even if the father did kill the murderer, it's because he's a murderer of a slave that Euthyphro shouldn't be concerned, because, now it isn't the case that you should never be concerned about the murder of a slave, that is a bad thing, but because it is unholy for Euthyphro to prosecute his father for murder. This is unheard of, it is a terrible thing to do, it is itself a cause of miasma, according to them. They don't say this explicitly, but they are very concerned with miasma altogether. This is why the father dropped the murderer into a ditch, and why Euthyphro himself is prosecuting his father. They are very concerned about miasma. So prosecuting his father at all is also a reason for miasma. It turns out that this case is not as obvious as Euthyphro had made it out to be at the beginning, and yet Euthyphro is still convinced that he is right. He does have to prosecute his father, and he says it's because the relatives don't know. They know badly about to hosion and to anosion, about holiness and unholiness. We've seen in previous episodes that Socrates was already hinting towards the idea that Euthyphro actually knows what to hosion is. But here we see that it's a necessary part of Euthyphro's whole defense of his prosecution. It's because the others don't know about to hosion that they are wrong, and he can prosecute his father because he does know. He has knowledge of to hosion. This allows Socrates to begin an interrogation of Euthyphro regarding to hosion. It's a truism in Socratic studies that Socrates finds people who think that they know something, and he then demonstrates to them that they don't know what they think they know. But there's more to it than that. This is a Platonic dialogue. The characters represent aspects of a certain concept. Therefore, Euthyphro is an aspect of to hosion. He thinks he knows what to hosion is, and he does actually represent one aspect of to hosion.